lot of people who are tuning in on this teleconference are not that familiar with or conversant with. I'll give you a really important example. We just went through a wrenching, how should I say, national kind of check where you are date, November 2nd, this midterm election, where the Democratic overwhelming majority in the House, the Senate, the White House, 2 years of having the road to themselves has now changed. And we now have a Democratic White House under the aegis of President Obama. We have a marginally Democratic Senate under Harry Reid, with, I think, only three more senators, and we would then have a Republican majority there. But we clearly have a Republican majority House of Representatives. When you say that this attorney source says that the strategy for disclosure at an official level is going to be through the legislative branch, that comes together with data that I have, which says, A, that the Democrats, specifically this administration, deliberately lost the House of Representatives to the Republicans as part of a disclosure strategy. And you're going to say, what? How can they do that? Well, look, elections can be rigged. They can also be rigged when you don't really fight, when you don't really campaign, when you don't get your base out, when you do everything you can to drive your base home so the other guys take the field and they win. So now what we have is a Democratic White House, a Democratic Senate, but a Republican House. And what was the first thing that happened in this new reality? Obama signs, because we get House and Senate votes agreeing to this tax bill, which involves a tremendous concept in the American political system right now called compromise, where each side gives something. And you can actually look at this new legislation that Obama signed, I guess it was yesterday, and it is a compromise on the tax bill. It is, yes, tax cuts for the rich go on, but there's a whole bunch of programs for the poor and the middle class that also go on, including unemployment, that didn't have a snowball's chance and whatever without the compromise. Now, the compromise only came about because of the threat in this 111th Congress. I'll come back to that in a minute. Only under the threat that there would be even worse Republican initiatives that the Democrats can't abide by in the 112th Congress, which is coming up on January 5th. We're still operating under the old Congress, the 111th Congress. Well, I've been looking at this pattern of 11s because, Bill, you're absolutely right. The 11s, and I think it was David who also mentioned the Kennedy executive order, which is filled with 11s. 11 is a code for 19.5. 19.5 is a code for hyperdimensional realities and physics and a window to a level of experience and reality that most of us in three dimensions can't even begin to imagine. So when you begin to see these code numbers appearing again and again and again, like 33 is also a stand-in for 19.5. I won't bore people with the math. It's on the Enterprise Mission website. It's in our DVDs. We put it out there for years and years. There's a very simple mathematical process whereby you get 33 and 11, or 11, 11, 11, 11, 11 out of 19.5, which is the code for the physics. So if we say the physics ultimately is driving everything, meaning that what we're doing in terms of consciousness, in terms of political action, in terms of even this teleconference this afternoon is being held against the backdrop of whatever the physics is doing, then you got to have a way to keep track of what the physics is doing. And the way they have decided to do this is to incorporate this physical set of changes that are cyclic over long periods of time, tens of thousands of years, correlated with these alignments with and against the center of the galaxy. They have got all that down in what I call, and some of my colleagues call, the ritual rule book. And just like the catechism, if you're a Catholic, they have been following this ritual rule book. And the way they do it is they pick numbers that are magic numbers in terms of the physics, and then they make things happen on those dates. It's basically a form of sympathetic magic for anybody that's ever dabbled in any kind of magic, notwithstanding the candidacy there in Delaware during the last election. Isn't it interesting that witchcraft and magic became part of the conversation in a mainstream election because of the candidate in Delaware running for the Senate on the Republican side, and she lost. Now she's going to go over to Fox, and so she'll be talk about magic and witchcraft to her heart's content on Fox in mainstream media. What I'm saying is these barriers that formerly held all these various worlds, its nice, neat compartments, appear to be dissolving more and more, and we're seeing a bleed through in areas where normally people would not even hear the word witch or magic, and yet during the entire campaign, it became part of the lexicon every single night. Witchcraft, magic, I'm not a witch. I mean, she did an actual commercial where she started out saying, I'm not a witch. What kind of reality are we living in? We're living in a hyperdimensional reality where as we get closer and closer to a nodal point in this physics, more and more weird things, apparently gauged as weird by mainstream criteria or standards, will appear to bleed through into their realities. And back to what Bill said, more and more people are picking up, are becoming aware that consciousness and reality are not exactly what they were taught when they were in grammar school. And the name of the game appears to be, as I said a moment ago, when the student's ready, the teacher shows up. So bottom line for me in this segment, I think we're going to see a lot more of these bleed-throughs and a lot more really bizarre things happening, but I would not at all discount the idea that based on this new bilateral politics in Washington with a Republican House, a Democratic Senate, and a Democratic White House, there in fact could be a very strong legislative effort to get around the disclosure of problems by making it part of a legislative discussion, i.e. hearings, i.e. what Greer and I and many others have been calling for many, many years.
Okay. Thank you, Richard. And Bill, or let's see, David, do you have anything to add?
In my opinion, there is some very interesting stuff going on with this bipartisan Congress. And I think that where I'd like to sort of see the discussion start to go, we're into the disclosure that we can do here today, because I don't want us to feel like we are having this conference to gossip about what might happen and when it might happen. Something, Kerry, that you said in the beginning, I think is very critical for us to all keep in mind, and that is that we have an unprecedented opportunity for the sharing of information in a way that was never before possible. What Dr. Greer calls Murder Incorporated has been going on for many years. And as an example, Fulford talks about the American Academy of Scientists, which openly acknowledges that there are 6,000 different patents that have been classified for national security. Bill, I'm sure you'll remember when we were all on stage together in Zurich that we had Dr. Brian O'Leary there, and he gave a whole presentation about a series of different scientists like Paramahansa Tiwari, who had come up with free energy breakthroughs. We actually had Henry Deacon out himself publicly, come up on stage, reveal his identity, and talk about his own experience of the free energy devices that he saw while he was working in an official capacity, and he said you can go and look at it yourself. Dr. O'Leary specifically spoke about Dr. Stefan Marinov, who was working at the University of Graz in Austria as what he called essentially the head of the free energy movement in Europe. Marinov was spoken about as having committed suicide by jumping out of the 10th floor window of the University of Graz. But here's the thing. He did not leave a suicide note. He was a happy man. And this suicide jump that he made was backwards, which strongly suggested